thought it was just an ordinary rainy night. A simple act of kindness. She never imagined that the drenched, shivering little boy she rescued was the missing only son of the city's most powerful financial magnate, Damien Blackwood. She thought the next day would bring a hefty reward, and then she would return to her ordinary, impoverished life. However, when 5 black Bentleys, symbolizing absolute power, silently surrounded her dilapidated apartment building, the man handed her not money, but a dangerous contract that would turn her life upside down, and a shocking secret about her parents' death. How does one act of kindness drag a simple social worker into a vortex of wealthy family feuds and corporate warfare? What kind of story is truly hidden behind it all? The story begins on a stormy night. At midnight, the heart of the city seemed to stop beating. With a dull clap of thunder, the entire west side was swallowed by an endless darkness. 27-year-old Clara Reed was trapped in this sudden power outage. She had just finished her second part-time job at the youth community center, missed the last bus, and her phone had only 1 bar of battery left, just enough to be a flashlight. The last few coins in her pocket weren't even enough for a fraction of a taxi fare. The rain fell like a cold curtain, separating her from the familiar world. She tightened the thin, faded old coat around her and quickened her pace, trying to take a shortcut through a notoriously chaotic alley. The alley was a mixture of damp mildew and the sour stench of garbage. The puddles underfoot bone-chillingly cold. Just then, a blinding flash of lightning tore through the night sky, briefly illuminating the depths of the alley. Clara's heart skipped a beat. She saw a small figure, like a frightened animal, huddled behind a rusty dumpster. It was a little boy. It was Leo. Clara took Leo back to her small but warm studio apartment. This little nest on the 4th floor of an old apartment building was the sanctuary she had earned with her meager social worker's salary and endless hard work. The walls were covered with yellowed posters, the bookshelf was crammed with second-hand books, and the only decoration was a stubbornly growing pothos plant. She found some of her nephew's old clothes for Leo to change into, and made him a cup of hot cocoa with her last bit of milk. The boy held the warm mug, his body still trembling slightly, his sea-blue eyes filled with caution and fear. "You're safe now," Clara said in the softest voice she could manage. "Can you tell me any more information, like your father's name, or how I can contact him?" Leo shook his head, tears welling up in his eyes. "Dad said never to trust the police, and never to tell strangers his name. Bad people are everywhere." The sentence sent a chill down Clara's spine. This was definitely not the kind of safety advice an ordinary family would teach their child. She looked at the cracked screen of the children's smartwatch on Leo's wrist, her mind filled with questions. What kind of family did this child come from? In the middle of the night, Leo woke up from a nightmare, crying out, "Don't touch my mommy." Clara held him all night, gently humming a lullaby, just as she usually comforted the traumatized children she worked with. She had no idea that a silent storm was gathering outside her small apartment building. At 3 in the morning, Clara was awakened by an unusual light outside her window. She saw a scene she would never forget. On the street below, 5 pitch-black Bentleys, like dormant beasts, had silently surrounded the old building. Their headlights were off, their sleek, imposing outlines traced only by the cold rain. The neighbors fearfully drew their curtains, not daring to make a sound. Fear wrapped around Clara's heart like a vine. Were these people here for Leo? Just as dawn was breaking, a rhythmic knock sounded at the door. It wasn't loud, but it carried an undeniable authority. Leo's eyes lit up instantly. He ran to the door and whispered, "It's Uncle Julian. I can smell his cigar." Clara's heart was in her throat. She took a deep breath and slowly opened the door. Standing outside were 2 men in black custom-made suits. They were powerfully built, their expressions cold and stern, like 2 emotionless statues. The one Leo called Julian bowed slightly, his tone flat but firm. "Miss Reed, we've come to take Master Leo home. My employer wishes to thank you personally." Before Clara could answer, a figure stepped out from behind Julian. He was tall, in a perfectly tailored dark gray suit that outlined his broad shoulders and upright posture. His hair was as black as midnight, slicked back neatly. But what was most striking were his eyes, deep as a winter lake, so sharp they seemed to pierce one's soul. The powerful and dangerous aura he exuded made the narrow hallway feel oppressive. He was the financial emperor of this city, Damien Blackwood, a name that existed only in business legends and urban myths. Leo let out a cheer and threw himself into his arms. Dad! Damien held his son tightly, a trace of warmth appearing on his icy face for the first time. He looked up, his gaze falling on Clara, a complex mix of emotions in his deep eyes. Miss Reed, thank you for taking care of my son. No words can express my gratitude. With that, he took a check from his suit pocket and handed it to Clara. This is a small token of my appreciation. You can fill in any amount you wish. Clara looked at the blank check. It was enough to solve all her financial problems, even to let her live a life of affluence. But she shook her head and took a step back. Mr. Blackwood, I don't need money. I just did what any decent person would do. As long as Leo is safe, I'm relieved. Damien seemed surprised by her reaction. His sharp gaze re-examined her, as if seeing her for the first time. He saw the integrity and exhaustion in her eyes, and he also saw, in her simple but tidy apartment, a book of poetry on the bookshelf that his late wife had loved, a very rare first edition. It was the first gift he had ever given her. This dramatic coincidence made his eyes flicker, touching the softest part of his heart. He withdrew the check and handed her a black business card instead. It had only a name and phone number in gold foil. Then, please take this. Clara. He said her name for the first time, a barely perceptible softness in his tone. If you ever run into any trouble you can't solve, call this number. In this city, anything money can solve, this number can solve. He turned and left with Leo, leaving Clara with a mysterious and imposing back. Clara clutched the code card, feeling as if she had just woken from a surreal dream. She thought this strange encounter was over, and her life would go back to normal, but she was wrong. This was just the beginning. The wheels of fate had started to turn, and she had been pulled into a vortex from which there was no escape. Want to know why Damien looked at Clara differently? Because of a book of poetry? Want to know how this mysterious business card will change Clara's destiny? Be sure to subscribe to our channel. The story only gets more exciting from here. A few days later, Clara's life seemed to have returned to normal. The events of that night felt like an unreal dream, with only the black business card lying quietly in her drawer to remind her it was all real. However, trouble soon found her. The nonprofit community center she had poured her heart into, Westside Community Outreach, suddenly announced that due to a major donor pulling all funding, her entire youth outreach program would be forced to shut down. The news was a bolt from the blue, announced publicly during the annual showcase she had organized for the children, plunging her and everyone else into despair. As she was scrambling to deal with this, a large bouquet of white roses was delivered to her apartment. The bouquet looked so out of place in the shabby hallway that it attracted the stares of her neighbors. Tucked inside was a card with Damien Blackwood's flourishing signature and an invitation to dinner. Clara's first instinct was to refuse, but then she received an anonymous text message. The foundation that just cut your program's funding has a director from Volkov Capital on its board. Perhaps tonight's dinner is a good opportunity to discuss alternative solutions. The text sent a shiver down her spine. She realized the funding cut was likely no coincidence, but collateral damage in a power struggle she couldn't comprehend. For the families and children she fought for the job she cherished, she had no choice. That evening, Clara went to a private club, hidden on the top floor of a skyscraper. Damien was already waiting for her in the rooftop garden, with the glittering lights of the entire city as his backdrop. I knew you'd come. Damien's voice was low and magnetic. He confessed everything. His business rival, Volkov Capital, had been pressuring him through various means and attacking the charity projects he secretly supported was one of them, intended to distract him. And you, Clara, have unfortunately been dragged into this because of Leo. Clara's heart sank. So, you invited me here to compensate me? No. Damien shook his head, his gaze turning unusually serious. I'm here to give you a choice that can get you out of your predicament and help me at the same time. He stared at Clara and said, word by word, I need you. Leo needs you. He hasn't truly smiled since his mother died in an accident 3 years ago. But after spending one night at your place, I saw a light in his eyes that I hadn't seen for a long time. Your background as a social worker, your understanding of child psychology and trauma is exactly what he needs. I want you to be Leo's private growth consultant. I will pay you a salary sufficient to pay off all your student loans and ensure you live comfortably for the rest of your life. More importantly, I will personally resolve the community center's funding issues and ensure it thrives for years to come. The proposal hit Clara like a bombshell. It was tempting, but also fraught with unknown dangers. Why me? She asked. Damien's gaze drifted to the distant night sky, a hint of sadness in his voice. Because you remind him of his mother, kind, righteous, with a light in your eyes, even when surrounded by darkness, and you read the same books as she did. Clara finally understood the flicker in his eyes that night. Such an absurd, fateful coincidence. I need time to think. Of course. Damien stood up. But I want you to understand, Clara. Sometimes you have to walk into the darkness to protect the light you cherish. I'll give you 3 days. On the way home. Clara's mind was a battlefield. It was a deal with the devil. But the stakes were everything she held dear. What would she choose? If you were Clara, what would you do? Tell us your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like and share so more people can see this story. In the end, Clara accepted Damien's offer. She moved into the Blackwood family's castle-like estate. Here, she was exposed to a completely different world. It was less a home and more a disciplined, hierarchical business empire. Clara's work went smoothly. Leo became very attached to her. Together, they started a small vegetable patch in the garden, planting tomatoes and cucumbers, bringing a touch of life to the cold estate. However, in their daily interactions, Clara also saw a side of Damien that no one else knew. He would sit alone in his late wife's art studio, late at night, lost in thought, and would clumsily check Leo's homework after a brutal business negotiation. Clara found her feelings for this complex man quietly changing. 3 months flew by, and Clara's probationary period was coming to an end. One evening, Damien came to see her. Volkov's people have started investigating you. His voice was graver than ever. They know about your existence, and that's very dangerous. Clara's heart tightened. What should I do then? Leave? No. Damien's answer was firm. You're not going anywhere. From now on, you must stay here until I've dealt with them completely. I can't lose anyone else. His voice was laced with pained suppression. Just then, the ever-loyal Julian came in and handed Damien a file. After reading it, Damien's face turned deathly pale. What is it? Clara had a bad feeling. Damien handed her the file, his voice hoarse. This is the investigation report on your parents' car crash. I always thought it was an accident, but it seems I was wrong. Clara's hands trembled as she opened the file. When she saw the report's conclusion, her world fell apart. Her parents hadn't died in an accident. They had been silenced, and the mastermind behind it was Volkov Capital. What broke her even more were the details. Her father, a well-known accountant in the city, had accidentally discovered evidence of large-scale financial fraud by Volkov Capital through a series of shell companies. And one of the key shell companies had a highly covert transaction with the Blackwood Group years ago. Her father had intended to hand the evidence to the regulatory authorities, and for that, he was eliminated. So, your group was involved too? Clara's voice was ice cold. That was my father's old business. I cleaned up all the gray areas when I took over. Damien tried to explain, his eyes full of pain. Clara, believe me, if I had known. Enough. Clara felt doubly betrayed. Anger and grief overwhelmed her. She felt like a cosmic joke, having developed feelings for a man whose family was tainted by her parents' death. "I'm leaving," she screamed, turning and storming out of the study. This time, she wasn't joking. Clara frantically packed her things, though there wasn't much to pack, just a few old clothes. Her mind was buzzing with a single thought: escape this place. Escape this man. "You can't go." Damien blocked the door, grabbing her wrist in a rare loss of composure. His grip so tight it hurt. "Volkov's people are watching you. If you go out now, you're walking into a trap. Better than staying here with a liar like you." Clara shook off his hand, tears streaming down her face. "Let me go. I don't want to see you again." Seizing Damien's moment of stunned silence, Clara slipped past him and ran out of the estate without looking back. She didn't know where she was going, just running aimlessly through the streets in the dead of night. Eventually, exhausted, she stopped in front of the now abandoned community center she had once fought so hard for. She curled up on the cold steps, letting despair consume her. Just then, a black Bentley pulled up silently in front of her. Damien got out of the car, alone. The rain began to fall again. He had no bodyguards, none of his usual commanding presence. He just looked like a drenched, tormented man. He walked towards her but kept his distance, just standing there. "My wife, Elena," he began, his voice painfully hoarse, "was also killed by Volkov. They staged an accident, just like they did to your parents, because she discovered a conspiracy they were planning, one big enough to shake the market's foundations, and she urged me to back off. They thought she was weakening my resolve, so they got rid of her." Clara looked up, stunned. "I hate them, Clara. I've spent 3 years setting up an inescapable trap to completely destroy them in the business world. I admit, at first, I sought you out because you were so much like her, righteous, kind, like a beam of light. But then I realized you're not her. You're tougher, braver. The woman I fell in love with is you, Clara Reed." He took a step forward, the pain in his eyes almost overflowing. "I didn't tell you the truth because I was afraid. I was afraid of losing you, afraid you would look at me like this. I was wrong, so wrong. But please, give me one more chance. Not for me, for Leo, and for the revenge of our parents. Stay with me and watch the empire of Volkov Capital fall." The rain fell harder, mixing with Clara's tears. Her heart was a tangled mess. Hate and love waged a war within her. Finally, looking at his bloodshot eyes, she said wearily, "I'll go back for Leo. But between you and me, we're done." The story has reached its climax. What will happen to Clara? Stay tuned to our channel. The answer will be revealed in the next part. Back at the estate, an icy wall stood between Clara and Damien. She focused solely on taking care of Leo, ignoring Damien completely. The Cold War atmosphere made the entire estate oppressive. Just then, an unexpected person approached Clara. A man claiming to be a retired financial journalist ran into her at her usual coffee shop. His name was Miller, a seemingly amiable old man with eyes that saw through everything. "Miss Reed," he said, stirring his coffee casually, "before I retired, I was following a cold case. A very famous accountant who died in a bizarre car accident. I could never let that case go." Clara's heart sank. "Recently, I heard an interesting story," Miller continued. "A simple social worker suddenly moves into Damien Blackwood's home. Coincidentally, this social worker is the daughter of that accountant. Small world, isn't it?" Miller's appearance was like a key, unlocking another door in Clara's mind: legal justice. She began to waver. Could she really trust Damien's revenge? Wouldn't it just be another bloody corporate takeover? She started meeting with Miller secretly. Miller told her that if she could provide inside trading information from the Blackwood Group, he could write an explosive story, reopen the investigation, and bring both Volkov and Blackwood to justice. However, Clara had no idea that her every move was being watched by Damien. One evening, Damien threw a stack of photos in front of her. They were pictures of her meetings with Miller at the coffee shop. "You'd rather trust an outsider than me?" Damien's voice was filled with disappointment and hurt. I only trust the law, Clara retorted. The law? Damien sneered. You think Miller is a good guy? He's using you to get a scoop that will make him rich and famous. You think his justice is clean? By the time the media and the regulators get involved, the case will drag on for 10 years, and in the end, those scum will hire the best lawyers and get off scot-tangent-free. I, on the other hand, can make them evaporate from the capital market in a week. Which do you choose? Their trust shattered once again. This time, Clara was pushed to the edge of a cliff. She had to make a choice. Trust the man who represented a gray world, or the seemingly bright embodiment of justice. Just as the relationship between Clara and Damien hit a stalemate, disaster struck. Volkov Capital, losing ground in the business war, decided to take a desperate measure. They orchestrated a meticulous kidnapping. Their target not the heavily guarded Damien, but Clara and Leo. When Clara woke up, she found herself and Leo locked in a derelict, rust-smelling warehouse. Clara forced herself to stay calm. Using her professional knowledge, she began to analyze the situation and taught Leo to tap out SOS in Morse code with his fingers. At the same time, she subtly observed the kidnappers, using psychological tactics to divide and unsettle them, buying precious time for Damien's rescue. Meanwhile, outside the warehouse, Damien was going insane. The moment he discovered Clara and Leo were missing, the dormant beast within him was fully awakened. He mobilized all his forces, casting a citywide net. Finally, by tracking all abnormal signal points in the city, his tech team located a suspicious source, a faint, irregular, but highly rhythmic tapping signal. It was Morse code. It was SOS. A brilliant light erupted in Damien's eyes. He knew it had to be Clara. A swift and decisive rescue operation was launched immediately. When Damien's figure appeared at the warehouse entrance like a god, the kidnappers were already trapped. There were no intense shootouts, no bloody scenes. Everything ended under Damien's precise control. He rushed to Clara's side, untying her with trembling hands, and pulled her and Leo into a tight embrace. "I'm sorry, I was late." His voice was hoarse with fear. In his warm, strong arms, Clara could no longer hold back her emotions, and tears streamed down her face. In that life-or-death moment, she finally saw her own heart. The hatred was still there, but her love for this man, and the fateful bond between them, had already surpassed it. "Damien?" She looked up at him from his embrace, her eyes tearful but firm. "End this, and then take us home." Damien looked at her and nodded solemnly. He gently kissed away her tears and whispered a promise in her ear. "I promise you, the war ends tonight, and our story is just beginning." After the kidnapping, Clara and Damien's relationship finally thawed. But just when she thought things were getting better, a new crisis quietly grew from within. One of Damien's most trusted deputies, the group's chief trading officer Marco, had always been wary of Clara. He believed her presence made Damien weak and emotional in his business decisions. To protect the group's interests, he decided to act on his own. He used Clara's meetings with Miller to stir up trouble, spreading rumors on the board that Clara was a corporate spy, trying to undermine Damien's position. One afternoon, as Clara was watering the tomatoes she and Leo had planted in the garden, a driverless lawnmower suddenly went out of control, hurtling towards them like a mad beast. In the nick of time, Julian, who had been secretly protecting them, lunged forward, pushing them both out of the way, but his own arm was slashed open by the sharp blades, a cut deep enough to see bone. Damien was furious when he heard the news. He immediately realized it was no accident. That night, he summoned Marco to his study. Clara stood outside the door and heard Damien's ice-cold voice from within. "You touched someone you shouldn't have. She is not my weakness. She is my bottom line, the mistress of this business empire. You threatened her. You threatened the entire Blackwood group." There were no arguments, no excuses. Clara only heard a muffled thud, and then silence. The next day, Marco was arrested for malicious short selling and leaking trade secrets, facing prison time and having all his assets frozen. This incident made Clara deeply realize that she had to face not only external enemies, but also the deep-rooted rules and dangers of this man's world. She also understood for the first time what Damien was willing to do to protect her. That night, Damien came to her room with a first aid kit and personally treated the scrape on her arm she got while dodging. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," he said softly. Clara shook her head, took his hand in hers, her gaze incredibly firm. "I understand. From now on, whatever you have to face, I'm with you." Damien looked up, and seeing the determination in her eyes, the tension he had been holding finally released. He leaned in and gave her a gentle, cherished kiss. "Clara Reed," he whispered in her ear, "will you marry me, become the mistress of this business empire, and be my one and only queen?" This time, Clara nodded without hesitation. The story is finally reaching its grand finale. Will Clara accept Damien's proposal? Don't go anywhere. The final ending is coming right up. The thrilling kidnapping and the internal cleansing were the last straw that broke Volkov capital. Damien Blackwood, with Clara's help, launched a thunderous counterattack. But he didn't use violence. Instead, he used something far more destructive: capital. He anonymously submitted all the evidence of Volkov Capital's years of financial fraud and market manipulation to the regulatory authorities. Overnight, the once invincible financial giant collapsed. In the first light of dawn, Damien returned to the estate. He walked up to Clara, got down on one knee, and once again presented the diamond ring he had prepared long ago. "Now, all obstacles are cleared. Clara, marry me." Clara smiled through her tears and held out her hand. Their wedding was both private and grand. Married life opened a new chapter. Damien kept his promise and began to transform his business empire. He shifted his focus to legitimate business sectors, investing heavily in green energy, technology, and the arts. And Clara found her new role. She utilized the Blackwood Group's resources to establish a massive social welfare foundation. She became a powerful advocate for the disadvantaged, a beacon of hope for countless families in need. With her wisdom and kindness, she brought a human warmth to the once cold business empire. She was no longer a girl who needed protection, but a queen who could stand side by side with Damien. A year later, Clara gave birth to a lovely daughter. They named her Elena, in memory of Damien's first wife. One warm afternoon, the family was sitting in the garden. Leo was telling his little sister a story, and Damien came up behind Clara, gently wrapping his arms around her. "Thank you." He rested his chin on her shoulder, his voice low and content. "You're the one who pulled me out of the darkness and made me a better man." Clara turned and kissed him with a smile. "We are each other's salvation." She looked back on the journey of her life. So incredible, so dreamlike. From a struggling social worker to the mistress of a vast empire. And it all started with a single, kind choice on a stormy night. Fate is a wondrous thing. It makes you endure hardships, but it also allows you to find the most brilliant love in the most unexpected places. The story of Clara Reed is not just a Cinderella fairy tale, but an epic of love, redemption, and growth. In a world built on power and money, she crowned herself queen with kindness and wisdom. If you enjoyed this romantic story, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with your friends.